today in Rich in Relationship. We're going to talk about what if infidelity is a system failure more than a morality failure. What infidelity is a combination of things. It's a combination of a failure to recognize boundaries or adhere to them. It's a failure to connect emotionally. And also there's like an identity drift. Any breach of trust reveals something that's missing. And the trick is to start identifying the breaches of trust before they get really big. Welcome to another episode of Rich in Relationship. I'm your host, Rich Heller, and today we're talking about what infidelity teaches us about desire, escape, and boundaries. It's all about relationship systems, hard concept to really think about. It doesn't sound very sexy, and how they can either build up relationships or leave back doors for things that are less desirable to happen. And in the last episode, we interviewed a new friend of mine all about infidelity. I hope you checked it out. If you didn't, go check it out because this episode builds on that one. All right, so we have a listener question. It is, I never thought I would be the person who cheats or the person who gets cheated on. And now we're here and I don't even know what this says about us. Was something missing? Was it a mistake? Or is something deeper happening that we never saw coming? And this is not an unusual feeling when there's a breach of trust of any kind, but particularly when there's infidelity, right? There's something about sharing our body with another person when we have promised, we're assuming monogamy here, when we have promised that we are going to be monogamous, that feels particularly personal. There's shock. There is a rupture of identity, the identity of the marriage, the identity that we thought our partner had, our identity of ourselves as someone who's in a loving and trustworthy relationship. There's rupture of all these things. There's, of course, a loss of trust. There's confusion about what does it mean? Why did they do this? And the first place we typically go is blame, right? It's because they are broken. It's something wrong with them. It couldn't be anything that happened here with me. It's them, it's them, it's them. And what we want, though, really what we want, first, we want to understand it. Like, how did this happen? Right? And for most of us, if understanding it means taking a little responsibility, we're willing to do that. We want to move from blame and brokenness to a sense that there's a lesson. Maybe there's a way that something that can at least make me stronger, if not the marriage stronger. Now, some of you, as you're listening to this, are actually in the middle of infidelity. I have found that it is not unusual for me to be speaking to people who are in the process when I do this show. And so I'm now going to speak directly to you. Breach of trust has stages. We want to be aware of where we are in the stage. Is this brand new? Are you completely in shock? Are you maybe processing it? And how far along have you come in the next stage once you're aware of it, is how far along are you in confronting the other person, calling forth, hey, you broke my trust. Once you call forth, you broke my trust, has there been an indication that maybe something was missing in the marriage that led to that breach of trust? There's stages to this. It is not unusual for there to be a sense of gridlock, of feeling really stuck, because there's so many converse feelings coming up. On the one hand, you feel betrayed. On the other hand, you still love and care for the person. And if you have children, it's not like you can just throw them away. You're kind of stuck with them, right? Once you have children with someone, even after you're divorced, they're part of your life forever. And for those of you who are entrepreneurs, couple entrepreneurs, it's even more complicated because you're intertwined not only at home, not only with children, but you work together. And some people, what they do is they throw out the family and they decide that at work, they're just going to be work partners and they do it very businesslike. And I propose to you that had that attitude been present in the first place, being very businesslike at work, it's possible that the needs that were not being met at home might have been met. It's possible that the infidelity may not have happened. And I'm going to own, there are some people who are serial cheaters, I'm going to call it serial infidelity people who are pathological liars, people who cannot help themselves. Complete transparency. I had a parent like this, a parent who part of his pattern was to break trust, beg for forgiveness, be taken back in, break trust, beg for forgiveness, and be taken back in. And it wasn't because he was an immoral person. It's because he had some unresolved guilt from his childhood, and he was literally reenacting his childhood with his partners over and over. And what he's trying to do is win back his mom's trust. So sometimes infidelity is more complicated than what we're talking about today. This is more garden variety infidelity. And I'll lay it out for you. In real life, when people step out of a relationship and get into a relationship with someone else, it's because they have needs that the relationship is not meeting. Now, that's not the fault of the person who is the victim of infidelity. It's a breakdown in the relationship. In fact, now let me talk to people who are just listening and wondering about infidelity. If you find yourself having a roving eye, and we've all had a roving eye, true confession, even I have a roving eye. The nature of the roving will also often reveal if you're feeling your needs are being met in your relationship. If you are looking and just admiring the beauty of the world, that's one thing. If you are looking and undressing people, if you are looking and hoping for a little flirtation, if you are looking and hoping for a little positive feedback, then that is an indication that maybe the needs that you came to the relationship with that had been filled are not being filled. And so don't feel guilty about it, all right? Instead, start to identify what are the needs. Let me tell you a little story. Brad, our good friend Brad, did not set out to have an affair. It started with long hours, growing distance from each other, and a subtle shift. At home, Brad felt like a problem. Gwen was always on him. They would take work home with them. She would needle him about his shortcomings, or he would be working and she would needle him and not being there for the kids. No matter what, Brad was wrong. And Brad would try and fix it, and he was wrong, always wrong. But when he got outside, when he was out doing sales work with clients, and you may recall in one of the previous episodes, Brad had a little flirtation with a client, he felt appreciated. The need that he had to feel appreciated, the need that he had for a certain level of, let's call it intimacy without it being physical, just emotional intimacy, being appreciated as a form of emotional intimacy, was being filled in other places. And often infidelity starts with that. And Brad started to check out, and Gwen said, I kept asking what was wrong, and you kept saying nothing. And Brad said, because I didn't even know how to explain it. And that's why I'm giving you this frame of, hey, if you're looking for appreciation or flirtation or admiring of others in a way that's not appropriate, that's your unconscious mind trying to find a way to say, hey, something needs to change here. Now, Brad's affair wasn't just about attraction. It was about escaping pressure. Like, he felt pressure at home and he felt pressure at work because Brad and Gwen worked together. They lived together. They raised children together. And because they did those things together, they weren't having the kind of caring conversations they used to have. And because they weren't having the caring conversations they used to have, the foundation of safety, I was going to say sust, and safety and trust, the foundation of safety and trust that they had built was eroding. And Brad unconsciously just started looking for it in other places. Now, it sounds like I'm giving him an out, and I am kind of giving him an out. But let's be honest. If he had slowed down enough to look, he would have seen the signs. Honestly, Gwen saw the signs, and Brad wasn't responding. They weren't just disconnected. They were operating without a shared structure. right? Their structure for truthful, honest, caring communication had crumbled. And so there was limited truth. There was limited expression of desire. And when Brad would express his need to Gwen, hey, baby, she'd be like, I don't really feel like it. Because guess what? Men go to physical intimacy and afterwards they feel safer. Women, generally speaking, want to feel safety first before they have physical intimacy, particularly in a loving relationship. I'm not talking about, you meet someone and you just want to body surf with them. I'm talking about in a caring, loving relationship. We worked together and they started to shift the question from who's at fault. It went from, Brad, I can't believe you did this, to what broke in our system of communication, our system of shared values, our system of focus on where we're going. And we introduced 3 lenses. Desire, not just sex, all right? Desire for appreciation, desire for feeling alive, desire to feel chosen, desire to feel cared for. Escape, all right? Affairs often begin where pressure is high and we need a way to release it, and it ain't happening at home. Communication is low and self-expression feels unsafe, right? You do express yourself, but you kind of get pecked on or even hammered on. And also boundaries. I'm not talking about rules, not just don't cheat, we don't do that. But there had never been a conversation about what conversations should we only be having here and not with other people. What are off limits in our relationship with other people? When do we cross a line with other people that we shouldn't be? And where does honesty, self-honesty and honesty with each other stop? And where does it start again? You see, most people treat infidelity as moral failure or even relationship failure. But what if it isn't just that? It might be a moral failure, but honestly, it's not that we're immoral people, right? It's that we've done something that feels out of sync with the values and morality we've expressed. And we are imperfect vessels, all of us. And it's not really a relationship failure. You could say, well, if we really loved each other, this never would have happened. But it has to be more than that. If we're going to be, let's break it down to something really tangible. Is putting on extra weight a moral failure? No, it is a failure of developing a system that reflects our values and our intention in being fit. Similarly, infidelity is not necessarily a breakdown of morality. Well, it is a breakdown in action, but it doesn't mean that the person is immoral. It means that the relationship failed to institute and maintain a system for having the relationship be fit, for having both people's needs be met. The purpose of marriage is to create a relationship that supports each individual, and if you have children, them too, in growing and blossoming and prospering as human beings. And when that starts to happen, when one person in the marriage starts to experience a breakdown, then the marriage is failing. And the marriage is failing not because it's a bad marriage, but because the relationship has not been nurtured. Because the systems have not been articulated. Often, what infidelity is a combination of things. It's a combination of a failure to recognize boundaries or adhere to them. It's a failure to connect emotionally. And also there's like an identity drift. I've worked with tons of couples who have had infidelity, and no one came to me and said, well, Rich, the truth is I wasn't getting any, so I started looking elsewhere. That's not how this happens. The way this happens is they say, well, I didn't really think about it. I met John, and John and I started to talk, and we liked each other. I thought we could be friends. And then we started to talk about feelings, and I thought, wow, this is so cool. I can talk about my feelings with John. This is great. And then we started talking about our relationships. And, now that I look at it, we probably shouldn't have been doing that, but it felt so good because that wasn't happening at home. And then we started spending time together, and eventually one day it just kind of happened. I didn't plan it. It was almost like I drifted into it. Like most infidelity happens like that because of a boundary failure, emotional disconnection, and identity drift. My identity is I am a faithful, upright, moral person. But the drift is unconsciously something's missing. And I don't know how to advocate for it here, or when I do advocate for it, it's pushed away. And I'm not even sure what I'm advocating for. And so I just kind of drift. When desire is unspoken, when pressure is unprocessed, when boundaries are undefined, we need an outlet. And guess what? A breach of trust is usually what it is. Sometimes it's a financial breach of trust, sometimes it's emotional, and sometimes it's sexual. Well, Brad and Gwen did not start with forgiveness. All right, they started with understanding what had happened. What were the needs? Was there a plan for how those needs would be fulfilled in the future? And was there a commitment to not exploring alternatives in the future, a commitment to coming to Gwen with those needs? And alternatively, and equally, Gwen agreed to the same. Even though she hadn't stepped out, she agreed to the same. They also started to look at the structure of their communications. Were they at home putting work aside and focusing on building up the marriage? Were they at work setting home aside and focusing explicitly on their individual roles, because they did not have the role clarity that they could, right? What happens is people get role clarity, the company grows, and then it gets fuzzy again. They hadn't grown with the company. They stopped having conversations about what went wrong, and they started having conversations about what do you want that you haven't been able to ask for, say, or feel heard about. They started mapping emotional boundaries. When and where do we get our emotional needs met? They started mapping relational boundaries. What's appropriate outside the partnership? And I'm going to tell you that a lot of times there are assumptions that in a relationship that we both know what's appropriate outside of the relationship. But when we actually talked about it, like Brad and Gwen did, we found out that Gwen had a much higher standard of emotional fidelity than Brad did. In fact, Brad was pretty clueless, if we're honest. So she brought him up to speed. And they talked about internal boundaries. What am I tolerating? What am I avoiding? Am I tolerating feeling unfulfilled in some way? Right? And this is how this works. It's kind of like you've got a set of curtains that you really hate, but you just don't do anything about it. And every time you look at those curtains, you feel empty. Well, sometimes when we have an emotional need or an emotional feeling that we don't like, but we keep tolerating it, every time it comes up, we just feel emptier and emptier. And so what we tolerate or avoid becomes the norm, and it brings up a sense of inadequacy, of emptiness, of not enough. And so just like we need to get rid of those curtains we don't like, we need to get rid of those feelings, not stuffing them. We need to make a change in our lives so that those feelings are no longer present, because feelings are there to teach us to move towards what works. They rebuilt safe ground. They rebuild it through caring conversation, through consistency, through transparency, through containment. Go back to episode 24 if you're not sure what that is. We did massive exploration of containment in episode 24. If you are not listening to this whole series, you need to start tuning in. Infidelity can feel devastating for some people, but it does not have to be. It can be an opportunity to go deeper. It can be an opportunity to be closer and to grow through it. Any breach of trust reveals something that's missing. And the trick is to start identifying the breaches of trust before they get really big. For somebody to step out with another human being and to break that vow, there are multiple breaches of trust along the way that lead to it, not just by that person, but by the person who's the victim. There's many breaches of trust. And so if you're feeling like you're leading parallel lives even, and you're not feeling like you're an infidel, there's multiple breaches of trust. The absence of structure is what allows this to happen. And so next episode, we're going to talk about, this is not a very sexy word, governance. Why healthy partnerships need governance. We're going to move from reacting to examining what caused the breakdown. We're going to move to being proactive about building up our marriage and our relationships. If you like what you're hearing here, if you feel like this is helping you, like, subscribe, share, help us grow this movement. Rich in Relationship is a movement. And in the meantime, have an amazing day and a fantastic tomorrow.